The Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. Well, we're doing just that today. But can you actually succeed in these interesting and chaotic times? Well, one professor from INSEAD, Morten Hansen, has co-authored a book that says you can do just that. And he's with us today to tell us more. Welcome to INSEAD Knowledge.
Great being here, Shelley.
Okay, the book is called Great by Choice. It's sort of a sequel to the book that by your co-author, Jim Collins. It's called Good to Great. All right, what kinds of choices are we talking about that kind of get you from good to great?
Yeah, a key finding in this book is that greatness is not a function of circumstance or luck or the chance that you've been given, but greatness is a function of the path that you've chosen, the principles that you have chosen to follow in building a great company. The premise of this book is how do you become great in a world full of change, uncertainty, even chaos? And you would expect in a world that is changing constantly around you, that what you ought to be doing is to morph to the next thing and so the next thing and so on. But what we found is that the winners in these industries we studied that had historically been very turbulent industries, the winners in these industries, they followed a path of constant pacing, that in bad times they made sure that they hit the progress markers they had set for themselves and did everything they could to hit those markers. And in good times, they made sure they were on the same march, not going too far, not going with overextended growth, not going to an acquisition spree and so on. So they were pacing themselves, and in the long run, that's what paid off, even in a very chaotic industry world.
So how much attention do you need to pay to the environment in which you're operating? Certainly a lot of people recently have been adapting, actually changing, and maybe too much. They're thrashing about. How much do you pay attention to the environment?
What we found is that this idea of marching, pacing yourself, it was combined with another quality, which is, we call a leadership quality of productive paranoia. By that we mean these leaders like Bill Gates or Andy Grove, that were the winners we studied, some of the winners we studied, they were hyper vigilant about the environment in which they were in. What are the threats that could hit them? What are the bad storms that could come their way? And they took action to prepare themselves for that. So you can be hyper vigilant about what's going on around you, so you have your sensors up. But you also need to prepare yourself. And if those things that can hit you are bad things, you need to be in a position. And these leaders, they always prepare the organization for bad storms that they thought would come. Now, they didn't know when, and they didn't know in what shape. But it could be an industry recession, it could be collapse of demand, it could be a regulatory change, it could be a price war, it could be all kinds of bad things happening to you. And the way you prepare, for example, is that you build your cash reserves. Bill Gates was very good at that, Andy Grove too. They had large amount of cash on the balance sheet. Is one way to create that preparedness for the storm.
Now you mentioned Andy Grove from Intel and then Bill Gates from Microsoft, but what about a non-technology company?
An even better example would be Southwest Airlines, which if you take the airline industry in the United States, over the last 30 years, it's been a chaotic, turbulent, disruptive industry. And there's bankruptcy after bankruptcy in that industry. And one airline rose to greatness over the last 30 years in that industry, only one, and that's Southwest Airlines. The way that they became nationally dominant was because they followed a path of opening about 4 new cities every year. So in the bad years, 4 cities. Good years, 4 cities. One year in the 1990s, there were 100 cities that wanted Southwest to fly to their city because it's good for business. How many did they open in that year? 4, right? So that long march is what paid off for them.
How much did the 2008 financial crisis influence you in your research, what you looked at? I mean, you can't ignore it. It's still here.
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, this research started in 2001, where Jim Collins and I, we looked at the dot-com boom and bust, and we heard a lot of questions about, well, it looks like the world is now uncertain. So we decided to ask, the research question on this topic, which is, on the uncertainty, how do you become a great company in an uncertain world? I believe that the business world is never going to return to an era of stability, not over extended periods of time. And because of that, we live in a permanent state of uncertainty and turbulence in the business world. And because of that, we need new leadership principles that are relevant for that kind of business era, not one of stability that it really has been the last 40, 50 years.
Okay, now today, everybody's talking about innovation, shake it up, do whatever. You're talking about the environment's already not stable, so you have all these people being innovative and creative and changing things in an unstable environment. That sounds like chaos to me. So how do you do that? How do you handle it?
You would think that the great innovator, the company that innovates the most, should win in an uncertain and changing world. And so we looked at that, and that's not always the case, that the great innovator wins. In fact, I think that the innovation as a trump card is not such a potent card as we think it really is. Now, what we found is something different. First of all, you need to innovate to a certain level in your industry. And we call it innovation thresholds. So if you are in an airline industry, that threshold is not very high. A bit of innovation and you are okay. In a biotech and software and the computer business, it's very high. But once you reach a threshold in your business, in your industry, it doesn't seem to be a greater payoff after that threshold. It's sort of a ticket to play. You're a player if you can do it. What we found that you need in addition and in combination with that innovation is discipline. And the combination of having discipline and being creative, that's the hard part. And few companies are able to do it. Intel is a great example. Everybody thinks about Intel, it's such an innovative company. It turns out, going back in history, Intel was innovative, but often it wasn't the most innovative in its business. But it has something else that others didn't have. It's a slogan of Intel, Intel delivers. It means we're disciplined, we can scale up the innovation, we can deliver at large volume, at good quality, and in time. So you got creativity and discipline. In fact, I would say that's exactly what Steve Jobs brought back to Apple, is that combination. In the history of Apple before, when they only did the Macintosh, they had creativity. They were a very innovative company. But they had no discipline whatsoever in those days. And we saw the result. It was not a good result until this new era that was under Steve Jobs.
How did you choose the companies that you looked at? Was it because of their performance, because of the CEO? What went into the choice?
So the methodology is it's this thing called qualitative matched peer research, where you start out and you identify turbulent or disruptive industries. So that's what we want to study. And then secondly, who had done the best in terms of financial performance over an extended period of time. And those are the winners. And we started with those. And then we matched them to a comparable company in their industry. So think about it as two companies starting out running a marathon, say at the birth of the biotech industry in the late 1970s. And you have got two companies starting the marathon, running it together, and one is running ahead and winning by a lot. And the other one is running on an average speed. And then the question is, what separates them? And explains that performance. And that's how we did it across industries.
And let me end by asking you, what did you learn from this research, and what should we, lay people, be taking away from it?
I think one thing we learned is that in this new era of a business world of change, uncertainty, and turbulence, we need new leadership skills. And our book is a contribution toward that aim. So a personal learning for me is really around the idea of luck. That I wasn't quite sure, maybe it was that they just got luckier. But when we look at the evidence, what we find is that greatness in business, and I suspect in most arenas of life, is a function of extreme level of discipline, dedication, and consistency over time. And it's not a function of just the luck or the circumstance that you're in. That to me was a great personal learning.
So we should all do our homework and our research?
There's no excuse anymore. You can't just say, well, I didn't get lucky, or somebody else got lucky, or maybe I got lucky. It's not what matters in the end. That's not why Bill Gates is an amazing business person that we look up to, and he built a great company for a period of time. That's not why. He got lucky. We all got luck. That's the point. We all get a lot of luck, but that does not make one win and the others not.
Professor Morten Hansen, thank you for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
It's been a pleasure.